I like to play it up here when it's such the best. I know you're hungry. I know you're upset. I'm Joe Riccio, and welcome to Food Coma, My 70s Kitchen, brought to you from My 70s Kitchen. Today, we are going to make rigatoni and meatballs because, you know, this is one of those things, everybody has a way they like it. Whether or not your parents were good cooks or your grandparents are good cooks or not, you had some incarnation of this at some point. Whether it was like, you know, frozen meatballs and a jar of Prego or ragu, or it was, you know, some real deal shit. This is actually the first thing I ever learned how to make. I think I was like 16. And I've been kind of working on it ever since and changing things and tweaking them. And, you know, with like the meatballs, there's like the phases, you know, like at one point I was using buttermilk or just egg yolks. And then I was doing the deep fry thing and then back to the butter thing. So this is the way I make red sauce and meatballs, which you can use with any pasta and a whole bunch of Italian bread and butter. So this is how I do it. I got a couple little things that, little tweaks that I think you'll enjoy. We're gonna start olive oil in the pan here, and we're just gonna get some onion and garlic happening. This is just to flavor the oil. We're gonna put in 2 cans of Cento San Marzano tomatoes that I crushed by hand, along with 1 big can of the Cento tomato puree is gonna go in once these kind of, I don't wanna burn these. What we're gonna basically do to start is make the basic tomato sauce, and then we're gonna, as the sauce kind of simmers, because, you know, it's all right. I mean, it's not a bolognese. We're not gonna, you know, let this cook for 8 hours. It doesn't really need that long, but it never hurts to let it kind of cook for a little bit and let the flavors kind of become more complex. So we're just gonna get this started. So while we're making the meatballs, the tomato sauce is kind of getting happy, if you will. So we're gonna add the tomatoes. I got a big old vat of tomatoes here. Again, this is a very basic tomato sauce. That's what you want. I mean, you don't want anything. Honestly, then a lot of times when I find these little like pieces of basil in here, I throw those away. I don't feel like they even label it with the basil half the time. You just end up with basil leaves in it. They just assume you want basil, and I don't necessarily want basil. All right, so now the tomato sauce is in. We're just gonna hit it with a little bit of salt. We're gonna hit it with a little bit of black pepper. The element that I really like that your grandmother probably didn't use, miso. So I'm using a shiro miso, a white miso. Miso and tomato, this isn't like earth-shattering news at this point, but miso and tomato go very well together. And also miso's salty, so when you're adding salt and cheese and things like that, be mindful. But yeah, I just kind of work the miso in. Just a nice way to add some extra umami to the dish. One of those things you're eating it and you're like, why is this tomato sauce different? I can't tell, I like it. Something's different with it, it's the miso. We're gonna let this simmer for a little bit, and we're gonna start making the meatballs. I just want to kind of get that going. We're gonna set this aside. We made our tomato sauce, now it's time to start making meatballs. The meatballs, I'm just gonna lay out right on this cutting board directly. We're just gonna make it happen. Now these are kind of a work in progress. I started with a certain way of doing it. I've continually changed that over the years. This is how I'm currently doing it. There's no right or wrong way to make meatballs. There is a wrong way. If you don't use a lot of the stuff in it and you just make balls of meat, that's the wrong way, and those aren't very good. We're gonna start with your kind of grocery store variety Italian bread. And you want it to be a little bit stale. So I've let this sit for 2 days in the package. It feels like it's about there. And what you wanna do is basically break off about that much. Some people might take the crust off. I don't bother. You want to rip it into pieces like so. And then just add some water. And you basically want to add just enough water and start working with your hands. And you want it to basically just feel like a dough. You want to get it's like a dough-like consistency. Just keep working it around. This seems weird, but It's just the way it is. I remember the first time my grandmother showed me she was soaking bread in water. I was like, that reminds me of those eating contests where they soak hot dogs in water and eat them, and it makes me want to kill myself just looking at it. People are like, oh, you should enter an eating contest. I'm like, I hope you die. Normally, that would gross me right out. But in this case, it's important. And we're using 2 kinds of bread in this. So this is the first kind. And now we're going to add our meat. So I'm using beef and pork. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you have to have the holy trinity of veal, pork, and beef. And I've never really noticed veal in something when everything else is present. Like, I think the only thing it might add is like a slightly softer texture, but I mean, flavor-wise, pork and beef, everything you need is right there. Season, a little Malden salt there, okay. And this is also something that might be kind of weird, but I add granulated garlic to the meatballs. And the reason I do that is because I feel like, there's garlic in the sauce, and I feel like this way, the garlic flavor integrates through the meat, but it doesn't give you that kind of the texture that sometimes minced garlic can give you. That's like a newer development, probably in the last couple of years, that I changed over to that. And I like it. You might think that that is sacrilege. Probably right. And I don't care. You see, we got our meat nice and integrated there. I can no longer use both hands, so I guess we'll do pepper later. Next in, we're gonna do a couple eggs, because we're using about almost 3 pounds of meat, about 2.5 pounds of meat, and some chopped parsley, some fresh parsley, not dried. So dried garlic, fresh parsley, and then some of our grated cheese here. All right, so now we're gonna work this around in here. And this is when the meatballs start to smell delicious. When you're actually rolling the meatballs, you don't wanna like overwork them. But right now when you're mixing everything together, that's what you wanna do. So these are dry breadcrumbs. So we're gonna do some breadcrumbs. So initially you had the Italian bread that was soaked, so that was more of a wet ingredient. And now we have a dry element of these breadcrumbs going in. And what these do is really give the meatballs a nice texture. It gives them a nice structure for rolling, pulls everything together here. Time to make meatballs, and also time to add black pepper, now that I have hands free to do so. Let's roll some meatballs. And we're gonna brown these in butter, and then let them continue to cook in the sauce. I went through a phase where I was actually deep frying them, and occasionally I still do that, deep fry them in vegetable oil. But there's something about the butter that really softens the flavor. It's just a nice flavor. And butter and tomato, especially with the miso, go really well together. So we're just gonna make our meatballs. It is it's a forest of meatballs. It's a meatball fiesta. It's a Christmas miracle. All these meatballs. And that's right, my cat agrees. God damn it, fancy feast. Time to make our meatballs work for us by browning them in a whole lot of butter, and then I'll periodically be taking them over and dropping them in our tomato sauce, which is simmering away over here on the range. Meatballs are heavy, so don't be shy with the butter. It's just not time for that. Now, butter and tomato sauce is an amazing combination, just like miso. It just softens everything up. Goes nice with the acidity. Honestly, what can you add butter to? Unlike on another episode, right, a bacon rant, butter does make pretty much everything better. And even the things I was skeptical about, which I've still never tried, like that bulletproof coffee, which is made with Irish butter usually, I'm told it's delicious by people that I trust. So personally, I don't need butter in my coffee. If that's how you roll, don't let me stop you. Non-stick pan, because they're meatballs and they're soft. And sure, you can probably get a better fond, a better crust with a stick pan. But as Gordon Ramsay says, that if you use a non-stick pan, it won't stick to the pan. That's why they call it non-stick. And that's why we're using a non-stick pan, because we don't want our meatballs to stick to the pan. We want them to stay balls. We're gonna start putting our balls in the non-stick butter. Your sauce Dubry. You're sweating in the sauce. The Wellington is overdone. Put it in the bin. It's going in the bin, isn't it? It's beautiful. In the bin. Yeah, I guess I do sound like I'm from New Zealand. It's kind of like Paul Rudd in I Love You, Man, where he always sounds like he's Jamaican. Slap the biss. Oh, the weather outside is weather. And by the way, I don't cook them on all. I'm not like, ooh, I have to get every single, bit of square footage on the outside of the meatball. I basically brown them on two sides, and then they go in the sauce, and that's where they finish cooking. You know what'd be great is if my shaking the pan is what finally takes this table down. Oh, you, the viewer, at some point are going to be treated to the spectacle of this table going down. It's got little feet on it like horseshoes, and they like to come off at inopportune times. So I'm hoping that when it finally goes down, there isn't a lot of hot lipids or, hot oil happening to burn me. I hope it's when I'm like, just eating cookies. Oh, look. Hey, Tony, you see this pan doesn't stick. It's covered in non-stick surface. Look at that. So now I'm just gonna flip them over. Smells really good. Actually, these meatballs are awesome. I don't give a what you think. It's like to quote Big Worm, criticizing my meatballs is like playing with my emotions. I'm assuming you would have stopped watching a long time ago if you didn't at least have a little bit of interest, because I would have if I were you. The first batch of meatballs is bound for the pot. So now that your meatballs are in the sauce, and there's a lot of them, I could have made a little more sauce, but you know what? Sometimes, you want to press down a couple of the meatballs before they're fully cooked, and then the meat will distribute throughout the sauce and just flavor it. Make it more almost like a meat gravy, which in the bolognese episode I talk about is meat gravy, and don't ever call that ragu alla bolognese, because it's not. This, however, is a meat gravy. Put it on Duffy the Burner. Duffy the Burners are disappointing, not powerful, but probably good if we're not trying to burn things, But Duffy the Burner is going to keep this kind of simmering for a little bit, because this thing literally stays it stays ripping hot for a long time. So we're going to come back as soon as these have simmered for a little bit. We're going to get our rigatoni on. We're going to put some cheese on, and it's going to be meatball time. That's what I know. So we'll be back. All right, so the meatballs have had time to simmer in the sauce, are cooked through, and delicious. The miso really comes through with the tomato, and then the butter from the meatballs. This is definitely, this is a full pot for sure. But yeah, these are delicious. We got our sort of grocery store go-to here, a little DeCecco dried rigatoni, which there's nothing wrong with ever. Perfectly fine. I'm gonna put that there. And you can see there's some meatballs, but there's also some of the meatballs, as I said earlier, broke up in the sauce. So those are just integrating throughout the sauce. Oh yeah, look at that. Cheese. All right, it's a little black pepper. It's funny. I don't even need the pasta. The pasta's almost like a formality. I'm here for the meatballs, man. The meatballs and the sauce. So good. Here, I'll eat some pasta. Why not? The miso flavor and the butter and all the black pepper, all come together. It's not a lot of people do red sauce and meatballs that's heavy on, they cook with red wine, they use a lot of herbs, and those sauces are fine. They're very different than this. This is a very much tomato driven. There aren't a lot of herbs in it. There aren't a lot of spices. There's just salt, pepper. You have some parsley in the meatballs, a little bit of garlic in the meatballs. Yeah, this is what you make. Get a crowd coming over. That's what you want to put in the middle of the table right there. And then the best part is everybody just goes to sleep when it's over. This is definitely not food if you have plans afterwards, or you're trying to make plans, or you're trying to make something happen. This isn't the meal that you serve to people who you expect to do anything afterwards. This is gonna pretty much, this is lights out, but in a very, very pleasant way. So I'm Joe Riccio, and this is Food Coma, my 70s kitchen. And if you like what you saw today and you want more recipes, go check out our website at foodcomapodcast.com, or go to my YouTube page. It's Joe Riccio. Like and subscribe, and we will keep these videos coming.